My name is Rebecca Anderson. I'm 35 years old, and my own sister, the one whose life I practically funded, uninvited me from the wedding I was paying for via text message. Before I tell you how I turned her dream wedding into a nightmare of her own making, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know I'm not alone in this. It was a Tuesday. I remember the day with painful, crystalline clarity. Tuesdays are project deadline days at my software engineering job in Seattle. The office was buzzing with that familiar low-grade tension of a team trying to ship a product. I was deep in the zone, staring at a monitor filled with lines of code, trying to squash a particularly nasty bug. There's a certain kind of peace in that focus, a place where the messy complications of the real world just fade away. All that exists is logic, problem, and solution. I was actually feeling pretty good, looking forward to a long, overdue break. My first real vacation in years was supposed to start with my younger sister Jamie's wedding in Napa Valley, a fairy tale wedding for which I had already made a down payment of $50,000, with another $80,000 earmarked and waiting, a sum I had secured by putting my own house on the line. My phone, lying face down on the desk, gave a soft buzz, a text from Jamie. I smiled, a genuine, tired smile. Probably another last-minute logistical question. Should the floral arrangements have lilies or roses? Can you check the band's playlist? I picked up the phone, my thumb swiping across the cool glass. The words appeared, stark and black against the white background. They didn't make sense at first. My brain tried to parse them as a joke. Hey, sis, so Sarah and I decided we want to keep the wedding super intimate. Just immediate family and closest friends. So yeah, if you want to be part of it, you can watch through the live stream link, LOL. The three letters echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. The background noise of the office, the clatter of keyboards, the distant chatter, the hum of the servers, vanished. There was only the white glare of the screen and that casual, brutal dismissal. Intimate. I, her sister, her lifelong supporter, her financier. I wasn't considered intimate enough. I wasn't immediate family. Something inside my chest didn't just break. It shattered, then reformed into something cold and heavy. It was a terrifyingly calm feeling. There was no fire, no rage, screaming for release, just a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't an oversight. This was a statement. I swiped out of the message and went straight to my email app, my fingers moving with a strange, detached precision. I found the email from the bank, the one confirming the loan agreement. My eyes scanned the key phrase. The loan of $80,000, guaranteed by the property at 123 Maple Street, Seattle, WA. My property, my home, the one thing I had worked my entire adult life to achieve. I took a screenshot of Jamie's text. Then I took a screenshot of the loan agreement confirmation. I didn't reply to her. The desire to scream, to demand an explanation, was completely absent. In its place was a cold, methodical purpose. I created a new folder on my phone. I titled it simply, Receipts. My coworker Robert, a good man who had been a mentor to me for years, must have seen the change in my face. He leaned over from his desk. You okay, Becca? You look like you've seen a ghost. I blinked. The office came back into focus. I managed a small, tight nod. Never better, Rob. He didn't know it. My mother didn't know it. My sister certainly didn't know it. But the Rebecca Anderson they had known, the reliable, endlessly patient, pathologically giving Rebecca, had just quietly expired in that ergonomic office chair. The woman who stood up, her joints popping softly in the silent room, was someone they had never met, and they were about to get to know her very, very well. To understand the calmness that settled over me, the chilling lack of rage, you have to understand the debt I thought I owed. Not a financial debt, but a deeper, more corrosive kind. It was a debt of guilt, of responsibility, of a promise made to a dying man. For 20 years, I had been paying it off one piece of my life at a time. It all started, as these things often do, with a messy divorce. I was 15 when my parents' marriage finally imploded. I was old enough to understand the coded insults, the bitter silences, the nights my mother, Evelyn, would sit at the kitchen table, a single lamp illuminating her tear-streaked face as she stared at a pile of bills. Jamie was only 12, and my mom wrapped her in a cocoon of fierce, protective love. She was the sensitive one, the one who needed to be shielded from the ugliness. I was the strong one, the one who was expected to understand and endure. After my father moved out and then across the state, his presence in our lives faded from a reality to a biannual phone call. Mom got custody of us both, and with that, she inherited the crushing weight of being a single parent with a receptionist's salary. I saw her exhaustion, the permanent worry etched in the lines around her eyes. So I stepped up. I got my first job at 16, flipping burgers at a local diner called the Corner Spot. I can still smell it, a mix of sizzling bacon, fried onions, and stale coffee. I'd work the dinner shift after school, come home smelling like grease, and put my meager cash earnings into a ceramic jar on the kitchen counter. The jar was for groceries, for the electric bill. But to Jamie, it was just there. She'd breeze in from soccer practice, effortlessly charming, rifle through the jar, and pull out a 10 or a 20. "Movie with the girls, big sis, thanks," she'd call out, flashing that $1,000,000 smile that always seemed to absolve her of everything. My mom would just watch her go, a fond, tired look on her face. If I ever protested, she'd pat my arm. "Oh, Rebecca, let her be a kid. She's been through so much." We had all been through so much. But somehow only her pain seemed to count. The first major installment on this debt was her college fund, or rather the lack of one. Jamie, with her good grades and charisma, got accepted into a prestigious private university on the East Coast. It was her dream, a world away from our modest Seattle suburb. My mom was bursting with pride, but it was a pride laced with sheer panic. The tuition was more than her entire annual salary. I was 20 by then, working a junior developer job. I was finally making real money, my own money. I had a small savings account, the beginning of a dream to one day own a home. I had plans, but then I saw my mother's face, so desperate to give her golden girl the world. I saw Jamie practically vibrating with excitement, and I saw my own small dreams, and they seemed selfish in comparison. The strong one had to be strong. "Don't worry, Mom, I'll take care of it," I said. For the next 4 years, a significant portion of my salary was wired directly to the university's bursar's office. I lived in a cramped apartment with a roommate and a perpetually leaky faucet, while Jamie posted photos of her dorm parties and spring break trips. My younger brother, Caleb, the quiet observer in the family, was the only one who ever questioned it. He found me one night staring at my bank account online, the balance depressingly low after a tuition payment. "Is this right, Rebecca?" he asked, his voice soft. "She doesn't even have a part-time job." I gave him the standard answer, the one I'd been telling myself. "She needs to focus on her studies, Caleb. She has so much potential." The next brick in the wall of my servitude was the car. The summer after she graduated, Jamie, high on her own perceived invincibility, totaled the perfectly good used car I'd bought her. She'd been street racing. She called me at 2 a.m, her voice shaky, but it was the annoyance of inconvenience, not the shock of a near-death experience. "The car's a write-off, Becca. My insurance is going to go through the roof. How am I supposed to get to job interviews?" I drove 3 hours to get her. Our mother was already there, fussing over her, checking her for scratches, while ignoring the metaphorical wreckage of her irresponsibility. "She made a foolish mistake," my mom said, her words a shield, protecting Jamie from my anger. "She's a good girl at heart, a 22-year-old good girl." I ended up co-signing the loan for a brand new sedan. My credit score, which I had painstakingly built, was now shackled to her recklessness. But the real anchor, the one that chained me to this role for over a decade, was the promise. My father's health had declined rapidly after the divorce. A few years later, he had a massive heart attack. The last time I saw him was in a sterile, beige hospital room that smelled of bleach and fear. He was a shadow of the man I remembered, lost in a sea of white sheets. He gripped my hand, his own feeling like a bundle of dry twigs. "Rebecca," he rasped, his eyes locking onto mine with a desperate intensity. "Your mother, she's blind when it comes to Jamie. She has a good heart, but she's a dreamer. She doesn't have your strength, your common sense." A tear slid down his temple. "Promise me, daughter, you're the strong one, the rock. Promise me you'll always look after her. Don't let her fall. Your father is on his deathbed. What do? You make the promise. You carry the weight." That promise was the reason I invested $30,000 in her so-called tech startup, a venture that evaporated in 6 months, leaving behind a trail of receipts from fancy restaurants and a trip to Las Vegas. It was the reason I covered her rent for the better part of a year when she was finding herself. Every time I wanted to say no, I would hear my father's voice, a ghostly whisper in my conscience. Don't let her fall. Caleb called it what it was. You're not her sister anymore, Rebecca, he told me one day, his frustration finally boiling over. You're her personal bank. You're her safety net. She's never going to grow up as long as you're there to catch her. Can't you see that? My colleague, Robert, the closest thing I had to a father figure at work, was even more direct. We were at lunch, and I had just finished telling him how I had to pay off Jamie's maxed-out credit card. Becca, he said, putting down his fork and looking me straight in the eye, I'm going to say this as a friend. You need to think about your own life. You want a house, right? You want to get that promotion to senior architect? Every dollar you give her is a dollar you steal from your own future. Family is important, but there's a difference between a lifeline and an anchor. She's an anchor, and she's dragging you down. I heard them, but the promise was louder. So when Jamie got engaged to Thomas, I was flooded with relief. He was from a wealthy, established family. This was it. This was her finally getting her life together. The wedding, naturally, had to be an affair to remember, a spectacle worthy of the Wellington name. 300 guests, a vineyard in Napa Valley, a celebrity wedding planner. The budget was obscene. The family meeting was predictable. It was Jamie and my mom, sitting on my couch, their expressions a carefully calibrated mix of hope and anxiety. Thomas's family is being incredibly generous, Jamie began, studying a loose thread on my sofa. But we're just a little short for the venue deposit and the initial planning fees. How short? I asked, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. 50,000, my mom said, her hand finding my arm in that familiar, placating gesture. It's her big day, Rebecca, a once-in-a-lifetime moment. We just want it to be perfect for her. I looked at my savings account later that night. The number was healthy, the result of years of disciplined work. It was my house fund, my future. I thought of my father. Don't let her fall. The transfer was made the next morning. A month later, the other shoe dropped. The bank won't approve the main event loan without a guarantor with significant assets, Jamie explained over the phone, her voice rushed. Thomas's parents have their assets tied up in trusts. It's a complicated tax thing. They can't do it. It was always a complicated something. She was asking me to put my house, the house I hadn't even bought yet, but had already secured in my dreams, on the line for her party. Please, Becca, she said, her voice dropping into that pleading tone she knew I couldn't resist. It's the last thing I'll ever ask of you, I swear. And I believed her. God help me, I actually believed her. I went to the bank. I signed the papers. I shackled my future to her fantasy. So you see, when I sat in my office chair reading that text, it wasn't just a message. It was the final invoice for 20 years of service. It was the culmination of the diner, the car, the startup, the rent, the promise. Jamie hadn't just uninvited me. She had declared, in the clearest possible terms, that my sacrifice, my loyalty, my very existence in her life was worthless to her beyond its monetary value. And as I sat there, the weight of it all finally settled. Not as a burden, but as a foundation of fact. I looked at the picture of my dad on my phone. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered. I tried, I really did, but looking after her can't mean letting her destroy me. The calm wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a decision. A war was coming, and for the first time, I was ready to fight for myself. The following morning felt different. The Seattle sky was its usual shade of overcast gray, but for me, the world seemed sharper, colors more vivid. I didn't drive to work. My first stop was a high-rise building downtown with a panoramic view of Puget Sound. I had spent most of the previous night not sleeping but researching. I combed through legal forums, articles on contract law, and reviews for the top financial lawyers in the city. I was a software engineer. My entire career was built on logic, on understanding systems and exploiting weaknesses in those systems. For the first time, I was applying that skill set to the flawed operating system of my own life. The law firm of Davis and Finch was on the 34th floor. Ms. Eleanor Davis was exactly what her 5-star reviews promised: sharp, impeccably dressed, and with an air of no-nonsense competence that immediately put me at ease. She listened without interruption as I laid out the last 2 decades of my life. My voice was steady and factual. I wasn't there for sympathy. I was there for strategy. I placed my phone on her vast mahogany desk and showed her the text message, the audio recording Caleb had given me, the loan agreement, and the proof of my $50,000 transfer. She reviewed everything, her poker face impenetrable. After a long silence, she leaned back in her leather chair and looked at me, a flicker of something in her eyes. Not pity, but professional appreciation. "Ms. Anderson," she said, her voice crisp, "your sister is a fool, a brazen one. But more importantly, she's made a critical error. By having you guarantee this loan with your primary residence, she's made you an indispensable party to the agreement. You're not just a benefactor, you're the financial linchpin. You have significant rights." "So what's the first move?" I asked. "The first move is never to engage the emotional party," she said, a faint predatory smile touching her lips. "We don't call your sister. We don't call your mother. We go directly to the source of the power, the bank. We will draft and send a formal notice of intent to withdraw collateral, citing a material, detrimental change in the personal and financial circumstances of the agreement." It was beautiful. It was clean, professional, and devastatingly effective. It was a move on a chessboard, and I was no longer a pawn. I walked out of her office feeling like I had just been handed a shield and a sword. Following her instructions to the letter, I sent the email she had drafted to the bank's loan officer with Ms. Davis CC'd. Then I did the hardest and most liberating thing I'd done in years. I turned my phone off for 5 hours. I went to Discovery Park and just walked, feeling the sea breeze on my face. I watched the ferries glide across the water. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about what my life could be like without the constant weight of someone else's expectations. At 3 p.m., I sat in my car and turned the phone back on. The ensuing digital explosion was everything I had expected. 42 missed calls, 25 from Jamie, 17 from my mother. The text messages were a digital tapestry of panic and manipulation. "Jamie, Becca, what the hell did you do? The bank just called me. They said you're pulling the guarantee. Answer your damn phone." Jamie, "This is a joke, right? This isn't funny. The final payment for the caterer and the venue is due tomorrow. You can't do this to me." Jamie, "You are ruining the most important day of my life over a stupid, thoughtless text. It was a joke, you idiot. I was going to surprise you with a first-class ticket." The lies were getting more desperate, more elaborate. It was almost impressive. Jamie, "Please, Becca, please call me. We can talk this out. I'm sorry, okay? I am so, so sorry. Just please fix this. You're the only one who can." Then my mother's messages, each one a carefully crafted guilt trip. "Mom, Rebecca, Elaine Anderson, I don't know what game you are playing, but your sister is beside herself. You need to call the bank and fix this immediately. She is your family, and you are tearing it apart. Mom, I did not raise a daughter to be this cruel and vengeful. Your father, God rest his soul, would be ashamed of what you are becoming." The mention of my father was a low blow, designed to hit me where I was weakest. But the shield of clarity, forged in the fire of that text message, held strong. I didn't reply. I just watched the messages pour in, each one a confirmation that I had made the right choice. That evening, as expected, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my mother's face, tight and furious. I took a deep breath and opened the door. She stormed in, her purse clutched like a weapon. "How could you, Rebecca? After everything we've done for you, after all the sacrifices." The absurdity of her words made me want to laugh. "Sacrifices? We? Mom, look around this apartment. I paid for it. The food in my fridge, the clothes I'm wearing, I earned all of it. Just like I earned the money for Jamie's college degree, her car, her failed business, and this ridiculously expensive wedding she felt I wasn't good enough to attend." "She is your sister," my mother retorted, her voice rising with an indignation that baffled me. "It is your duty, as the older, more successful one, to help her. She needs this wedding for her future, for her connection to Thomas's family. You are being selfish, and you are embarrassing all of us." "The only person she's embarrassing is herself," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "She made a choice. She's just not used to her choices having consequences. She's always had me to erase them." "You need to know your place in this family, Rebecca," she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense hiss. "Jamie is the one who needs support. You've always been the stable one. Your role is to be the rock. It's not your place to have hurt feelings." Not my place to have hurt feelings. That was it. That was the core of it all. I wasn't a person to her. I was a utility, a resource, a function. "No, Mom," I said, and the coldness in my voice surprised even me. "My role is to be a daughter, not a servant. My place is in a life I build for myself. I am done being the rock for everyone else to stand on." I walked to the door and held it open. I think you should leave now." The shock on her face was absolute. In 35 years, I had never defied her, never stood up to her manipulations. She stared at me as if I were a stranger, then turned on her heel and left, slamming the door so hard a picture frame on the wall rattled. The silence she left behind was heavy. For a moment, the shield wavered. The voice of doubt whispered, "Are you the monster they think you are?" Then another knock, softer this time. It was Caleb, my quiet, loyal brother. The moment I opened the door, he stepped in and wrapped me in a fierce hug. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just held on. "I'm so proud of you, Rebecca," he finally whispered into my shoulder. And I felt the last of my doubt wash away, replaced by a wave of gratitude. We sat on the couch and I showed him everything. The text, the lawyer's email, the flood of messages from Jamie and our mother. He just listened, his expression a mixture of sadness and grim validation. "I knew this day would come," he said. "I just prayed you'd find the strength before they took everything from you." He bit his lip, then pulled out his phone. "There's something you need to hear. I felt sick about keeping this for almost a year, but I didn't want to be the one to break your heart. But now you need to hear the truth from her own mouth." He explained about the accidental recording, the pocket dial. He pressed play. The audio was sickeningly clear. It was Jamie, her voice full of jovial arrogance, talking to one of her friends. "No, girl, Rebecca's covering most of it," she was saying, followed by a giggle. "You know her? She's basically a walking wallet. As long as you play the 'I look up to you, big sis' card and make her feel like the responsible one, she'll sign anything. It's actually kind of pathetic. But hey, it works for me. A walking wallet. Pathetic." The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent gasp. It's one thing to suspect a terrible truth. It's another to hear it confirmed in your sister's own voice, dripping with casual, cheerful contempt. Caleb's hand found mine in the dim light of the living room. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca." I shook my head, a strange, profound peace settling over me. The recording wasn't a heartbreak. It was a liberation. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence that I wasn't the monster. I was the one who had been preyed upon. "Don't be sorry," I said, my voice solid as bedrock. "You just handed me a nuclear weapon, and I am not afraid to use it." The days that followed were the eye of the storm. The digital onslaught from Jamie and my mother ceased, replaced by a heavy, foreboding silence. I knew they were panicking, scrambling to find another source of funding or another way to manipulate me. They were reacting. I, on the other hand, was being proactive. My grief had burned away, leaving behind a cold, sharp focus. I wasn't waiting for their next move. I was preparing my final one. My life became compartmentalized. By day, I was Rebecca Anderson, senior software engineer, methodically closing out my projects before my vacation. At lunch and in the evenings, I was Rebecca Anderson, client, deep in strategic preparation with my lawyer. Ms. Davis was a master. She had me document every financial contribution I'd ever made to Jamie, from the big-ticket items like tuition to the smaller, consistent ones like covering her car insurance or credit card bills. "We're building a narrative, Rebecca," she explained, her pen flying across a legal pad. "A clear, undeniable history of financial dependency and exploitation." It was during this meticulous preparation that we uncovered the next layer of her deceit. Reviewing the loan application Jamie had submitted to the bank, Ms. Davis paused, tapping a section with her pen. "This is interesting. She's listed your future father-in-law, Mr. David Wellington, as a pending co-guarantor." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It implies that Mr. Wellington has agreed in principle to co-sign, and his signature is just a formality. Is that your understanding?" "No," I said, a cold feeling creeping up my spine. "Jamie explicitly told me Thomas's family couldn't co-sign because their assets were tied up in complex trusts. She said it was a tax issue." Ms. Davis's lips thinned into a grim line. "Let me make a call." She had a vast network, a web of contacts built over 30 years in law and finance. She spoke for 20 minutes in quiet, coded language to someone at the bank. When she hung up, she looked at me with an expression that was both grim and triumphant. "As I suspected," she said, "no one from the Wellington family or their legal team has ever communicated with the bank regarding this loan. Your sister put David Wellington's name on a federal loan application without his knowledge or consent. That elevated this from a family squabble to potential bank fraud." The audacity of it was breathtaking. She wasn't just using me. She was using a man like David Wellington, a titan of finance, as a pawn in her pathetic scheme. The house of cards wasn't just flimsy. It was built on a foundation of criminal lies. I now had a weapon that could not only win the battle, but annihilate her entire position. The other side, unaware of the depth of their exposure, made one last clumsy attempt at manipulation. One evening, my phone rang. It was Alex, Jamie's best friend and maid of honor. "Bex, my girl," she began, her voice dripping with a practiced buddy-buddy sincerity. "Listen, I know you're pissed. You have every right to be. Jamie's being a complete idiot. We all know that." I remained silent, letting her spin her web. "But this is getting out of hand, girl. She's a wreck. Thomas is freaking out. Can't you just find it in your heart to forgive her, for the sake of the family? She's really sorry. She told me so herself. She just sucks at saying it." I thought of the audio recording. Pathetic. I thought of the fraudulent loan application. David Wellington. "Let me ask you a question, Alex," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. "Is she sorry for what she did, or is she sorry that I found out and that there are now consequences?" The silence on her end was telling. "Look, Rebecca, it's complicated." "No, it's not," I cut her off, the last vestiges of my patience gone. "It's very simple. Tell Jamie that her window for mediation has closed. Tell her my lawyer will be in touch, and then lose my number." I hung up the phone before she could stammer out another word. The final move was made by the bank. Faced with a legally volatile situation, they scheduled a mandatory resolution meeting. An email with a calendar invitation arrived, formal and cold. "Required attendees: myself and Ms. Davis, Jamie and Thomas, the bank's regional loan manager, Mr. Harris, and most importantly, Mr. David Wellington." Ms. Davis called me the moment she received it. "This is the endgame, Rebecca. This is where it all happens. We walk in there, present the facts, and you make your final declaration. You don't have to say a word to them directly if you don't want to. I can handle all of it." It was a tempting offer. A month ago, I would have gratefully accepted, hiding behind her strength. But that Rebecca was gone. "No, Ms. Davis," I said, looking at my own reflection in the dark window of my apartment. "I appreciate that, but I need to do this myself. I'll be there, and I'll be the one who speaks. I want to look her in the eye when her world comes crashing down." I wanted to witness the moment the walking wallet stood up and cashed out. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m., Thursday, in a conference room on the 40th floor, and I was walking in as the calm, controlled eye of it all. The conference room on the 40th floor of the bank's corporate headquarters was designed to intimidate. A long, dark mahogany table reflected the grim gray Seattle sky. The chairs were black leather and unforgiving. The air was chilled to a precise temperature that felt just a little too cold, designed to keep everyone alert and uncomfortable. It smelled of money and antiseptic anxiety. Ms. Davis and I arrived 10 minutes early. She gave my arm a firm, reassuring squeeze. "Deep breaths, Rebecca. We have the facts. The facts are our armor. Stick to the plan." I nodded, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. But my hands, resting on the cool surface of the table, were perfectly still. The nervous, fidgety woman I used to be had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone with a core of ice-cold resolve. Then they walked in. The air in the room instantly shifted, becoming thick with tension. Jamie entered first, looking like a woman walking to her own execution. Her usually impeccable hair was slightly askew. Her face was gaunt and pale, and she refused to meet my eyes. She was followed by Thomas, a vision in a perfectly tailored suit that seemed more like armor than clothing. His face was a carefully constructed mask of haughty indignation, but his eyes darted around the room, betraying a deep-seated panic. And then David Wellington entered. He was the center of gravity in the room. In his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a suit that whispered Savile Row, he exuded an aura of absolute control. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, profoundly irritated that his valuable time was being wasted on such a sordid little matter. His cool, assessing gaze swept across the room, lingered on Jamie with a flicker of contempt, and then passed over me as if I were part of the furniture. In his world, I was utterly insignificant. At last, the bank manager, a nervous, sweating man named Mr. Harris, scurried in and took his seat at the head of the table. He shuffled his papers, cleared his throat, and began. "Thank you all for attending," he started, his voice a little too high. "We're here to resolve the situation regarding the event loan for the wedding of Ms. Jamie Anderson and Mr. Thomas Wellington. To be perfectly clear on the bank's position, the loan of $80,000, which was guaranteed by Ms. Rebecca Anderson using her primary residence as collateral, is currently frozen pending resolution. He looked directly at me. Ms. Anderson has, through her legal counsel, issued a formal notice of intent to withdraw her collateral. I must be clear, without that guarantee, the bank will not and cannot release the funds. Furthermore, the loan would be called in, due in full, effective immediately. The silence in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. 5 sets of eyes were now on me. Jamie finally looked at me, her eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. Thomas glared, his hatred a palpable force. David Wellington simply watched me, his expression unchanged, like a biologist observing a specimen under a microscope. It was David who broke the silence. His voice was a low, powerful rumble that commanded attention. He wasn't addressing me. He was addressing his prospective daughter-in-law. I was informed by my son that this was a minor clerical error that would be resolved in 5 minutes, he said. Explain yourself. Jamie swallowed, a visible bob in her throat. It is, sir, it is. Rebecca is... She's my sister. We had a small family disagreement. She's just being emotional. She'll fix it. She turned her desperate gaze back to me. Right, Becca? Just tell them it's all a misunderstanding. Tell them you'll sign. We can talk about everything else later. This was the moment. The pivot point of my entire adult life. I could fold. I could do what I had always done. Swallow my pain, absorb the disrespect, and keep the peace. I could be the rock. Or I could be the earthquake. Ms. Davis gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Showtime. I didn't look at Jamie. I addressed my words to Mr. Harris and Mr. Wellington, the 2 men in the room who understood the language of power and consequences. Before I make my decision, I began, my voice calm and steady, astonishing even myself. I believe it's imperative that all parties in this room are operating with a complete and transparent set of facts. I believe Mr. Wellington, in particular, deserves to understand the full nature of the transaction he's been unwillingly drawn into. I placed my phone, screen up, on the polished surface of the table. The small, dark rectangle seemed to hold all the power in the room. Jamie, I said, finally turning to her, a few days ago, you sent me a text message informing me I was no longer invited to your wedding, suggesting instead that I could watch a live stream. Is that an accurate summary? Jamie's face, already pale, turned a sickly, ashen gray. Becca, this is not the time or place. It's a simple yes or no question, Jamie, I pressed, my voice like chilled steel. Is that what you sent me? She flinched and gave a tiny nod, a pathetic admission of guilt. Across the table, I saw David Wellington's eyebrow raise a fraction of an inch. Thank you, I said. You see, that text made me question my role in this whole affair. I always thought I was your sister, but I've come to understand that my role was perhaps something else. My thumb swiped and tapped. I pressed play. The conference room, with its soundproofed walls, was suddenly filled with Jamie's own cheerful, arrogant voice, captured perfectly by Caleb's accidental recording. She's basically a walking wallet. As long as you play the I look up to you big sis card and make her feel like the responsible one, she'll sign anything. It's actually kind of pathetic, but hey, it works for me. I pressed stop. The silence that slammed down on the room was absolute, profound, and devastating. Thomas's carefully constructed mask of indignation shattered instantly, revealing a face crumpled in horror and humiliation. He turned slowly to stare at Jamie, not with anger, but with the kind of revulsion you feel when you discover something rotten in your food. Jamie looked like she had been physically struck. Her mouth hung open. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of her lungs. But I wasn't watching her. I was watching David Wellington. The mask of bored indifference was gone. In its place was a cold, calculating fury, the anger of a powerful man who had just realized he'd been played for a fool by an amateur. His gaze was no longer on me. It was locked onto Jamie like a heat-seeking missile. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more barrel to empty. And that brings us to the final fact, I said, sliding a printed copy of the loan application across the table. I pushed it toward David. Ms. Davis had already highlighted the fraudulent entry. Mr. Wellington, this document, a federal loan application, was submitted to the bank with your name listed as a pending co-guarantor. Can you please confirm for Mr. Harris and for the record that you gave my sister your consent to do this? David picked up the paper. He held it with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. He didn't need to speak. The dangerous tightening of his jaw, the way a muscle jumped in his temple, was answer enough. He had been lied to. and his powerful name had been used by the sniveling, pathetic girl who dared to try and marry into his family. I leaned back in my chair. Checkmate. Mr. Harris was sweating profusely now, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. This is deeply troubling. This could be grounds for a federal fraud investigation. That won't be necessary, David Wellington said, his voice a low, deadly growl. He folded the application with surgical precision and slid it into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Then he looked at me, directly at me, and for the first time I saw something other than dismissal in his eyes. It wasn't kindness, it wasn't sympathy. It was the stark, cold respect of one predator acknowledging another's skill. He then rose to his full imposing height, his shadow falling over the table. He turned his full wrathful attention to Jamie. The wedding is canceled. Daddy, no, Jamie gasped, her voice shrill with panic. Be quiet, Jamie, he commanded, his voice cutting through her plea like a razor. He didn't even glance at her. The event at the Wellington estate, funded by my money and attended by my guests, is canceled. If you wish to have some pathetic little backyard ceremony with this liar, you will do so with your own resources. The Wellington name will not be tarnished by this fiasco. He looked at her one last time, his eyes promising a world of pain. You will not contact my son again. You will not come near my family or my business interests. If you do, I will unleash a team of lawyers on you that will make you nostalgic for the day you were born. With a curt, almost imperceptible nod in my direction, David Wellington turned and strode out of the room, leaving a crater of silence in his wake. Thomas was now sitting motionless, his face pale, his body language broken. Jamie sat frozen, her world utterly and completely demolished in the space of 5 minutes. Mr. Harris, looking terrified, turned back to me. Well, in light of all that, Ms. Anderson, your final decision regarding the collateral? I stood up, feeling a strange lightness. I looked at my sister, this broken stranger across the table. There was no joy, no sense of victory. Just a quiet, profound, and final sense of release. No, Mr. Harris, I said, my voice clear and steady. I will not be signing. I am officially withdrawing my collateral, effective immediately. Ms. Davis gathered our things. We walked toward the door, leaving the wreckage behind. As the heavy door clicked shut behind us, I didn't look back. There was nothing left there for me to see. The moment the conference room door clicked shut, it felt like a pressure valve had been released inside my head. The air in the hallway, still chilled and sterile, felt different. I could breathe again. Walking toward the elevator, I didn't feel the triumphant adrenaline I might have expected. There was no urge to celebrate. Instead, there was just a vast, quiet calm. It was the feeling of a long, debilitating fever finally breaking, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion and peace. Ms. Davis walked with me out of the building and onto the bustling Seattle street. The city sounds, the traffic, the distant ferry horn, the chatter of pedestrians felt grounding, real. You were magnificent in there, Rebecca, she said, her usual professional demeanor softening slightly. You were controlled, you were factual, and you were absolutely devastating. I've seen seasoned litigators with less composure. I couldn't have done it without you, Ms. Davis, I said, and I meant it. Thank you for helping me find my voice. We shook hands, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt like I was an active participant in my own future, not just a spectator. The official wedding day, the one that had once loomed so large on my calendar, came and went a week later with barely a ripple in my life. I only knew because Caleb called me. There was no grand celebration in Napa, no string quartet, no 300-guest banquet. Caleb had heard through the family grapevine, which was now buzzing with a garbled, sensationalized version of the story, that Jamie had gone through with it. Against her father's explicit wishes, and without a penny of his money, she and Thomas had held a small, hasty ceremony in the backyard of her mother-in-law's modest suburban home. A cousin had posted a few photos on a private social media page before being told to take them down. Caleb described the images to me. A handful of guests looking awkward on mismatched lawn chairs, wilting store-bought flowers, and Jamie and Thomas standing under a cheap-looking trellis. He said Jamie looked like a ghost at her own wedding, her eyes hollow. Thomas's smile, Caleb said, didn't reach his eyes. It was a brittle, desperate slash of forced confidence. My mother, Evelyn, was in the background of one photo, her face a thunderous mask of fury and defeat. I was, of course, not invited. This time the exclusion didn't even register as a slight. It was simply a fact, as relevant to me as the weather in a distant country. I spent that Saturday reclaiming my own life. I took Robert's long-standing advice and drove up to the Mount Sea Trail. I hiked for hours, feeling the satisfying burn in my lungs and the ache in my thighs as I pushed myself up the steep incline. At the summit, I stood on a rocky outcrop, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and looked out at the breathtaking expanse of the Cascade Mountains. It felt like the wind was scouring away the last residue of the past 20 years, blowing away the guilt, the obligation, the suffocating weight of that promise. I wasn't a sister. I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't a walking wallet. I was just a woman on a mountain. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. Here is part 7 of the rewritten script with Rebecca as the protagonist. The final confrontation came a few days later. I knew it was inevitable. The knock on my apartment door was hesitant, almost timid. I opened it to find Jamie. The change in her was shocking. The confident swagger, the designer outfits, the practiced charm, all of it had been stripped away. She was thin, sallow-skinned, her eyes sunken and haunted. She looked like a woman who had been hollowed out from the inside. Can I come in?" she asked, her voice a hoarse whisper. Wordlessly, I stepped aside. She shuffled into my apartment, a place she had never once bothered to visit before, and looked around with the bewildered air of a castaway. She couldn't meet my eyes. She stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the floor, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her wrinkled jeans. "Thomas left me," she said. The words were muffled, barely more than a breath. The day after the ceremony, he packed his bags and went back to his dad's. David cut him off completely, said I ruined the family name. Thomas told me I was a liability, that I ruined his life. She let out a dry, humorless laugh. His father's lawyers sent me a letter. They're threatening to sue me for the initial wedding deposits he paid. Fraudulent misrepresentation or something. She finally looked up at me, her eyes swimming with a pathetic, self-pitying despair. I lost everything, Becca. My husband, the money, the connections, everything's gone. I waited. I stood there in the quiet of my own home and waited for the words I needed to hear. The apology, the admission of guilt, the simple, honest acknowledgement. I was wrong. I'm sorry for what I did to you. But it never came. Instead, her despair curdled into resentment. Why did you have to do it like that? She asked, her voice gaining a whining edge. Why did you have to humiliate me in front of his father? You could have just said no to the bank. You didn't have to destroy me. And there it was, the final damning proof. After everything, she still saw herself as the victim. Her sorrow wasn't for the years of lies, the exploitation, the profound disrespect. Her sorrow was for herself. She was angry that her personal ATM had finally been shut down, furious that her lies had finally been called out in a way she couldn't charm her way out of. A wave of pity washed over me, but it was a distant, clinical pity, the kind one feels for a character in a book. The emotional cord that had bound me to her for my entire life, a cord she had systematically frayed and corroded year after year, finally snapped. I walked to my front door and opened it, letting the cool evening air flow into the room. I didn't destroy you, Jamie, I said, my voice quiet, devoid of anger or triumph. Your choices destroyed you. Every single thing that's happening to you right now is a direct consequence of a decision you made. I just decided to stop paying for them. She stared at me, her mouth agape, a flicker of her old entitled rage flashing in her eyes. So that's it? You're just done? You're my sister. I thought of my father, of his dying wish. Look after her. Don't let her fall. I had honored that promise in the only way I knew how, for as long as I could. But I had misinterpreted it. Looking after someone doesn't mean carrying them. It means wanting what's best for them. And what was best for Jamie was to finally feel the full, uncushioned weight of the ground. The promise I made to Dad was to look after you, Jamie, I said, my voice clear and final. Not to set myself on fire to keep you warm. You need to learn how to be a woman on your own. It's time for you to grow up. Goodbye. She looked at me, speechless, as the finality of my words sank in. Then, with a defeated, almost childlike slump of her shoulders, she turned and walked out of my apartment. And with that, out of my life. As I closed and locked the door, I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I just felt quiet. It was the profound, cleansing quiet of a room after a violent storm has passed, leaving everything ready to be rebuilt, stronger than before. The 6 months that followed were a revelation. It was like learning to breathe a new kind of air, an air free from the pollutants of guilt and obligation. The silence from my mother and Jamie was absolute. At first it felt strange, like a phantom limb that had stopped aching. Then it simply became peaceful. My phone no longer felt like a potential source of anxiety. It was just a tool. My bank account was just my bank account. My time was just my time. The first and most crucial act of this new era was symbolic. I sold the house I had been saving for, the one that had been used as the instrument of my potential ruin. It was tainted by the past. Its very existence was tied to the old Rebecca, the one who put everyone else's dreams ahead of her own. Selling it was a liberation. I took the proceeds from that sale, combined with the $80,000 I had reclaimed, and I did something radical. Something the old Rebecca would have considered impossibly selfish. I invested in myself. All of it. I bought a sleek two-bedroom condo in a new building in Seattle's Belltown neighborhood. It had floor-to-ceiling windows and a balcony that offered a stunning view of the city skyline and the glint of Elliott Bay. It wasn't a house with a yard, but it was mine. Unencumbered. Earned. With a portion of the remaining funds, I enrolled in a graduate-level certification program in AI and machine learning at the University of Washington. It was a field I was deeply passionate about, but the advanced courses were expensive, and in the past, that money had always been diverted to fund one of Jamie's emergencies. Now I spent my evenings and weekends immersed in study. My mind lit up with new ideas and complex problems. This new focus had a ripple effect. At work, free from the constant background hum of family-induced stress and financial anxiety, my performance skyrocketed. I was sharper, more creative, more engaged. I took the lead on a challenging new project, developing a predictive analytics tool for a major client. I poured my energy into it, working late not out of obligation, but out of genuine passion. The project was a massive success. It led to a major new contract for the company and, for me, a promotion to senior architect, a title I had been chasing for years, along with a salary that finally reflected the value I brought. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. My personal life, once a barren landscape of work and family duties, began to blossom. I took Robert's advice and finally joined that hiking club. On my third outing, a challenging trek up Mailbox Peak, I met Thomas. Not that Thomas. This one was a landscape architect with a quick laugh and an intelligent curiosity about the world. We fell into an easy conversation, talking for hours as we navigated the trail. What struck me most about our interactions was their simplicity. He wasn't interested in my job title or my condo. He was interested in my thoughts on urban green spaces, my favorite sci-fi novels, the terrible jokes I made. Our friendship grew organically, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared interests. It was a healthy, balanced relationship, a concept that felt revolutionary to me. Thomas didn't want anything from me. He just seemed to enjoy being with me. Caleb remained my one solid family connection. Our weekly dinners became a cherished ritual, a safe harbor. He was my link to the past, but also my partner in building a new future. He told me our mother, Evelyn, was bitter and isolated. She had tried to rally the extended family to her side, to paint me as the cold-hearted villain who had abandoned her daughter. But Caleb, in his quiet, steely way, had intervened. He calmly and factually told our aunts and uncles the full story, complete with the walking wallet recording. Faced with the undeniable truth, most of them had retreated, horrified, leaving my mother alone with her golden girl. Jamie was working a retail job at a big box store. She was living in a small, run-down apartment in a rough part of Tacoma. She was paying her own rent for the first time in her adult life. She was struggling, but she was surviving. It was a harsh, necessary education. One evening, I was scrolling through LinkedIn, updating my profile with my new promotion, when I received a message request. The name Lisa Moreno was vaguely familiar. The profile picture showed a confident-looking woman in her early 30s. Her message was brief and to the point. Hi, Rebecca. You probably don't remember me. I'm an analyst at a wealth management firm now, but I dated your sister Jamie for a while, back in my early 20s. A colleague of mine is a distant cousin of the Wellingtons, and I heard a heavily redacted version of the story about the canceled wedding and the financial dispute. I did some digging. I just wanted to reach out and say that I am so incredibly glad you stood up for yourself. You did the right thing. I was floored. I remembered Lisa. She had been bright, funny, ambitious. Their breakup had been abrupt and unexplained. I typed back a short message, thanking her for her kind words. A minute later, she replied, "She did the same thing to me." Smaller scale, but the same playbook. She sold me on this brilliant startup idea she had. I was young. I believed in her. I invested $10,000. It was every penny I had saved. She promised me equity, a future. 3 months later, she broke up with me over a text message. I never saw a cent of that money again. She told me the business failed, that it was just a bad investment. A year later, I found out from a mutual friend that she'd used the money to fund a 6-week find-yourself trip to Europe with her friends. I was devastated and too embarrassed to do anything about it. I just ate the loss. Seeing that a man like David Wellington was holding her accountable, it felt like a cosmic balancing of the scales. Stay strong. You deserve every good thing that's coming to you. I read her message 3 times. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the one that erased the last lingering shadow of doubt. This wasn't a flaw in Jamie's character. This was her character. She was a user, a predator, someone who preyed on the trust of people who cared about her. Her behavior wasn't a series of mistakes. It was a method. That week, when Caleb came over for dinner, I showed him the messages from Lisa. He read them, his face growing sad, but not surprised. "Some people are just who they are, Becca," he said softly. "I know," I replied, looking out at the city lights from my balcony, a city that now felt like my own. But the good news is, so am I. We didn't talk about the past anymore. That night, we talked about a new restaurant Caleb wanted to try, about a difficult coding problem I was solving, about a weekend trip Thomas and I were planning to the coast. We talked about life, my life, and for the first time it felt full of infinite possibility. So that's my story. It's been just over a year since that day in the bank's conference room, the day my old life ended and my new one began. I don't have any contact with Jamie or my mother. Caleb is the bridge, and he gives me sparse updates when I ask. Jamie is still working her retail job. My mother still complains to anyone who will listen that she's been abandoned by her ungrateful daughter. Their narrative hasn't changed, but it's no longer my story. It's just noise, a broadcast from a distant station I no longer tune into. Every morning now, I make a cup of coffee and stand on my balcony. I watch the city wake up, the ferries tracing white lines across the gray water of the bay. I don't feel the burning anger or the sharp sting of betrayal anymore. In fact, when I think of them, I feel very little at all. And that profound neutrality, that quiet indifference, it's the surest sign of healing. It's the scar that no longer aches when it rains. I used to think about all the money, the years of lost savings, the opportunities I deferred. I saw it as a massive loss, but I don't see it that way anymore. It was the most expensive, most painful education I could have ever received. But the lesson it taught me was priceless. The lesson is this: your value as a person is not determined by your utility to others. It is not measured by how much you can give, how much you can endure, or how much you can sacrifice for them. Your worth is not a commodity to be traded for their love or approval. It is inherent. It is in your character, your integrity, and most importantly, in the respect you hold for yourself. For 20 years, I allowed my family to define my worth. I accepted the role they assigned me: the rock, the stable one, the endless financial well, the keeper of a promise to a dying man. I thought that by playing that role, I was being a good daughter, a good sister. But I wasn't. I was just enabling their dysfunction and erasing myself in the process. My true value wasn't in my bank account. It was in the spine I finally discovered I had. It was in the strength of the woman who learned, at 35 years old, how to say a clear, unequivocal no. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for another person is to step back and allow them to finally meet the consequences of their own choices. And the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from anyone who sees you as a means to an end, a wallet instead of a human being. That $80,000 wasn't the price of a wedding. It was the ransom I paid to free myself. And it was, without a single doubt, the best money I have ever spent. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way, and maybe served as a reminder of your own worth. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and the expectations of others? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be reading them. And if this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content. You're not alone, not anymore.